My name is Arash Ghoddousi. I'm at Humboldt-University Berlin, and I'm connecting from Berlin today. And yeah, we have an excellent presentation lined up today by Gao Yufang on snow leopards and Tibetan herders and the concept of human-wildlife conflict, coexistence from a cultural perspective. Also, Gao Yufang is now with Yale University, based in Kathmandu at the moment, and he has done his education partly in China and partly in Yale University, and in the past 15 years he has worked with several different international and national organizations with in relation to large carnivore conservation, especially in the Tibetan plateau, and his work has received lots of recognition from different organizations such as National Geographic or Marsh Award or others in the field of conservation. We are having the pleasure of having Gao today. Also, we have Dr. Saloni Bhatia here from Ashoka Trust for Research in Ecology and the Environment, based in Bangalore, who is going to be the discussant of our talk today. Yeah, I think we are almost around 27 people in. So if there are a few things also from my side to bring up. One is that this talk is going to be streamed live on YouTube. So if there is any issues, any questions or concerns, please let us know right away. And also during the talk, if you have any questions, please write it in the chat box, and we will have time after the talk and after the discussion between Gao and Saloni to discuss these questions. This would be very much welcomed, of course. And yeah, this is basically all from my side. I would like to give the floor to Gao, and yeah, looking forward to your talk.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Arash, for the kind introduction. Hello, everyone. My name is Gao Yufang. Actually, Gao is my feminine name, but I usually go by Gao. So it's my great honor to be here with you today, and very appreciate as Snow Leopard Network invite me to give this talk and to share some of my dissertation fieldwork, my dissertation research with you today. I'm going to talk about the interaction between snow leopards and Tibetan herders on the Tibetan plateau, especially from a cultural perspective. So while I'm speaking, I'm going to turn off my video because the internet connection is not very good here. Okay, so, okay. And if you have any question, please feel free to type your comments or questions in the window, in the chat window, or post the questions after my talk. Okay. So this is what I'm going to talk about today. Basically, I'm going to tell you some stories about snow leopards and their encounter with Tibetan people on the Tibetan plateau. So first, I will tell 4 stories about encounters between snow leopards and humans. And the second part of my presentation, I'm going to talk about why and culture matters to coexistence. Thirdly, I will talk about, we use 2 cases to illustrate how Tibetan culture shaped our understanding about the ends and means of coexistence. Finally, I will give some summaries and reflections on the relationship between culture and coexistence beyond Tibetan plateau. So first, stories. This is a very famous story about snow leopards and a Buddhist meditator or yogi called Milarepa. And it's in the spring. The biting cold of spring lingers on, with some snow still covering on the ground. A group of people, as you can see in this picture, armed with tools for breaking through the ice and snow, trudged down a small trail leading up to a snow-covered mountain. And in the distance, the white peaks of the mountain shimmered in the sunlight, giving off a majestic view. Despite the beauty of the scenery, the move of this group is very sad. So last winter, a respected Buddhist yogi went into the mountain for a retreat, despite the pleas of his followers not to go. And the moment he arrived at the cave for meditation, heavy snow began to fall and continue for 18 days and nights, completely blocking the trail for half a year. Everyone believed that the yogi must have died of hunger and cold. Now that the spring has come, and the group has come to search for the yogi's remains. While taking a rest on their journey, they suddenly see an animal jumping on a hillside not far above them. They recognize it was a sar with a furry tail that is almost as long as its body. So the group watched the sar for a while until it slowly walks away. When they finally arrive at the meditation cave, they hear pleasant and familiar singing coming from inside, and it is the voice of the yogi. So the yogi invites them in and has already prepared tea for the group. Overjoyed and puzzled, the group asked the yogi how he knew they were coming. So the yogi said, "I just saw you all on the cliff." And the group responds in disbelief. "We only saw a sar on the cliff. Where were you?" And the yogi laughed. "I am the sar." So the sar mentioned in this 11th century story is a Tibetan term referring to the snow leopard, which is one of the most charismatic, prominent big cat species on the Tibetan plateau. I first heard this story in 2014 when I was investigating snow leopard distribution in the Chomolungma, or the Mount Everest National Nature Reserve, located in the southern part of China's Tibetan Autonomous Region on the border with Nepal. At that time, I served as the executive director of this newly established Everest Snow Leopard Conservation Center, or sometimes we call it Chomolungma Snow Leopard Conservation Center, which was one of the first organizations in China dedicated to the research and conservation of snow leopards. So over a period of more than 2 years, I led my team on more than 12 expeditions to the high altitude mountainous area around the Mount Chomolungma in search of snow leopards. It was near the hometown village of this yogi in the story that we used a camera trapping to capture the first photo of a snow leopard in the Mount Everest region in China. So the yogi in this story is Jejum Milarepa, who lived from 1052 to 1135, and is generally considered one of the most highly accomplished lama or saint in Tibet. In his youth, Milarepa gained infamy because he used sorcery to take revenge on his aunts and uncle, who had deprived him and his mother of their wares after his father's death. But Milarepa later experienced deep remorse for his action and turned to Buddhism. It is said that Milarepa spent years meditating in Lachigang, a snow mountain nearby Mount Everest, where he achieved the ability to transform his body at will into different forms. So this story of Milarepa transforming into a snow leopard is not only popular, among the around the Mount Everest, but also among local herders on the other side of the Tibetan plateau in the Three Rivers Source region, which is located in the southern part of Qinghai province in China. So the Three Rivers Source, in Chinese we call it Sanjiangyuan, covers a vast area of over 395,000 square kilometers. And this area is commonly referred to China's water tower due to its the origin of some of the biggest or largest rivers in Asia, including the Yangtze River, the Yellow River, and the Mekong River. Its alpine ecosystem are inhabited by Tibetan herders and their livestock, as well as snow leopards, gray wolves, brown bears, sheep, blue sheep, and many other wildlife species. So this newly formed Three River Source National Park is considered by some to be an experiment in living with snow leopards. So China is constructing its first national park in this part of Tibetan plateau. And this area actually has already become a national nature reserve in the year of 2003. And its size is about 5 times of Greater Yellowstone ecosystem. So you can imagine how big this area is. And snow leopard is the most charismatic species in this area. But sometimes all snow leopard prey on like blue sheep and other wildlife species as their main prey. But at times, snow leopard can attack people's livestock and occasionally cause what conservationists termed human-wildlife conflict. And this is the situation occurred when the needs and behavior of wildlife negatively impact human goals, or when human goals or behaviors negatively impact the needs of wildlife. And retaliatory killing resulting from such conflict is a major threat to the long-term survival of snow leopards, according to some conservation scientists working in this region. Therefore, fostering a harmonious coexistence between Tibetan herders and snow leopards, as well as other large carnivores such as gray wolves and brown bears in this area, became one of the most pressing challenges that China's first national park have to deal with. In 2011, I was given a scholarship from the Shanshui Conservation Center, one of the most influential conservation organizations in China, to spend a full year living and working with the local conservation groups in Nambo. And Nambo is one of the core zones of the Sanjiangyuan National Nature Reserve. This is a sacred mountain located in the eastern part of the Sanjiangyuan. And Shanshui, as many of you may already know, was established by Dr. Lu Zhi in 2007, a professor of conservation biology at Peking University and the former chair of the Snow Leopard Network. By 2011, Shanshui had already become one of China's most professional, most influential conservation NGOs, working with central, provincial, and local governments over various wildlife conservation projects, particularly in the Three River Source region. And in the same year, Khenpo Sampo, a distinguished senior Tibetan Buddhist monk known for his extensive traditional knowledge of the fauna and flora on the Tibetan plateau and his enthusiasm for integrating science to do conservation, founded the Nambo Conservation Association with other monks and herders in his hometown. So Zasi Sampo formed this organization in the Golok Tibetan Autonomous Region. So it's also in the Sanjiangyuan area. And Shanshui and Nianchok Nambo Conservation Association, in Tibetan terms, we call it Nianchok. Shanshui and Nianchok share a common interest in integrating science and tradition to advance conservation efforts. And over the past decade, they have collaborated on many projects. For the most time, I'm the one who mediate and facilitate the communication and the collaboration between these organizations. So when I was in Nambo, my interlocutors shared with me another fascinating story about the interaction between snow leopards and Tibetan Buddhist monks. They convinced me that this was not just a story, but an actual event that took place several decades ago during the Cultural Revolution. Right after the Cultural Revolution. And the protagonist of this story is a Tibetan Buddhist monk named Samden, who spent several years of meditation practice in a rock cave on a mountain just 13 kilometers south of Nambo. One day, a snow leopard came into his cave, and the following is a first-person account of this Nama Samden's experience, collected from a relative of Samden. So early one summer morning, while I was in deep meditation, a snow leopard suddenly appeared in front of my cave. After looking around for a long time, it entered my cave without hesitation. Despite my many years of meditation in this cave, I had never before encountered snow leopard. So I took this sudden appearance of snow leopard as a test from the gods and demos and remained steadfast in my meditation. The snow leopard touched me lightly and then went inward into the inner part of the cave as it searched for home. After a while, it left and returned with a cup in his mouth. Once again, the snow leopard passed by my backside and went straight into the inner part of the cave. There, she gently placed the cup down and lay down peacefully beside it. The cup nursed and slept soundly, completely unafraid by its mother's side. So the monk, this Nama, was very scared at the time. So realizing that the snow leopard's appearance was neither spiritual vision nor a trick of the gods and demons, I became very scared. However, there was nothing I could do but begin chanting the mantra slowly at first and gradually raising my voice. But the two snow leopards continued to ignore me. And in the evening, I lit the stove and made tea. Normally, animals are afraid of fire, but these two animals didn't even look at it. Since it is said that tiger and leopards hunt at night, so I thought it might be best to stay awake and keep watch near the mouth of the cave. Several days went by like this, and although the snow leopard had not shown any intention of harming me, I couldn't fully trust a wild animal. Moreover, if the snow leopard couldn't find any prey, I could become its meal. So the idea of moving to a new location crept into my mind. However, I also considered that the snow leopard's appearance might be a hindrance from demons and gods to make me abandon my place of retreat. So in the end, I decided to stay there, even if it meant endangering my life. Filled with uncertainty, I decided to seek guidance from my Lama and pray earnestly for a sign to indicate whether I should remain there or find a new one. So that night, I slept outside my cave and had a dream in which my Lama appeared and told me to stay and not to be afraid. So the next morning, I felt emboldened and confident. From that moment, I treated the snow leopard mother and her cub as if they were just watchdogs, and they in turn trust me. Over time, the cub developed a deep attachment to me, and the small cave became a shared home for the three of us. So after the baby snow leopard was able to eat on its own, its mother often brought back the remains of her kills, some bruised sheep, to the cave. Sometimes I also eat their leftovers and give sense in my prayers. At times, I even wonder whether the mother snow leopard could be the reincarnation of my kind mother. Such thought both saddened me and drew me closer to the snow leopard. After a few months, the cub grew up and was able to go out hunting with their mother. However, they would still return to the cave at night. Eventually, they moved to a different location and did not return, leaving me alone in the cave once again. One time, the patron, Jamba, who regularly brought me food, did not come, and I ran out of provisions. So for several days, I had to survive by borrowing and drinking the bones left behind by the snow leopard. But eventually, even those who were gone, and I was facing severe hunger. It was then the mother snow leopard returned to the cave, dragging a bruised sheep carcass in her mouth, and she left it at the entrance and then departed. I thought she would return that night to eat her kill, but she didn't come back, Realizing that she had brought the broodship for me, I cleaned and ate the meat, and I didn't have to leave the cave in search of food. So this is the story between a yogi, a Buddhist monk, and a snow leopard in the cave. When I was with the Everest Snow Leopard Conservation Center, we founded the Nambo Conservation Association to create a picture book, a brochure about this Lama's story, this encounter with snow leopards. And the book entitled Snow Leopard and Hermit, written in Tibetan, Chinese, and English languages, with beautiful pictures, were printed and widely circulated among herders on the Tibetan plateau, and were also shared online with the public. So at that time, I took this just as a conservation education project, and its purpose was simply to improve public understanding of snow leopards in Tibetan culture. Frankly, I didn't give much thought to the relationship between snow leopards and Tibetan people as reflected in this story. After leaving the Chumonangma, the Everest Snow Leopard Conservation Center, in September 2016, I started my PhD in conservation biology and in social cultural anthropology at Yale University. So it's the joint combined program, and I received systematic training in both conservation science and anthropology. So from 2019 to 2021, I conduct over 30 months of ecological and ethnographic fieldwork in Nambo, using methods from multiple disciplines such as conservation science, environmental anthropology, policy sciences, religion and ecology, among others. So I use camera trapping, microscopic analysis of snow leopards' diet, scat, interviews, participant observation, and other methods to collect all kinds of quantitative and qualitative data. Later in my field site, this time I came across two other stories about Tibetan Buddhist practitioners and snow leopards. So now let's look at the third story. In the third story, which featured a Lama who lived 300 to 400 years ago in Nambo, in my field site. And this Lama is, this story is unknown to most local herders currently living in Nambo. So my interlocutor, my collaborator, Kempo Jasi Sambo, and I came across this story in the book titled The History of Lombu. And it is a book about the history of a group of people. And this story, according to this story, there was a Buddhist practitioner named Shikung Jupsik Jamba, who came from Ujang, central Tibet, to practice in the Manawaching and Nambo mountains. So he became very well known, respected, and admired by Golok Tibetans in my field site. And he had this monk, this practitioner, had numerous disciples, including 18 prominent ones. And one of his disciples was named Sepun Gyabge. And it is said that Sepun Gyabge practiced meditation in Nambo for more than 10 years and achieved enlightenment, gaining the supernatural ability to tame wild animals. And this yogi was able to ride on snow leopards and use white-lipped deers or blue sheep as pack animals to carry him and transport his package, his things to various places. So this is the third story. In the fourth story, which is I collect this story from the local herders, and this story was told to me by Sharif, a local Tibetan herder in his late 30s, who currently lives in the Zalong Valley at the center of Nambo. And Sharif is very well known. This herder is very well known among wildlife conservationists working in the Three River Source region because of his family's significant loss of livestock to snow leopards. And his interaction with snow leopards were featured in the 2011 documentary film made by the Nambo Conservation Association, which has been widely circulated on the internet. So on October 4th, 2020, my research assistant, which is who is called Jime, I call it Jime, Shori's 18-year-old son, accompanied me on a field survey of snow leopard in the valley. And while searching for snow leopard footprints and scat in an area near the intersection of Saloni and Yiklong, another valley, then we came across a dense stand of Takma Gabo. This is the kind of rhododendron species, like trees, shrubs. So we came across this place, and Jimmy and I were concerned about the possibility of encountering brown bears, which had not been seen in Nambo for over 3 decades, but were recently spotted in 2020. So we were aware that the brown bear preferred to rest in this kind of habitat. And as we discussed how to protect ourselves from brown bears, Jimmy warned me that we should also be vigilant about another kind of species, a man-eating snow leopard, that according to some elders also occur in this area. I have never heard of any snow leopard attacking humans. And so I was very intrigued by the possibility of encountering such a creature. So Jimmy and I went on to in this area, and we were in search of snow leopard, the scat and the footprint of snow leopard. And Jimmy frequently kept talking to me and telling me that we need to be careful. And he emphasized that we should not even mention the name of this creature. We should not even mention the name of Sa, the name of snow leopard, because doing so might summon the presence of this creature, which is called Sawande in Tibetan language. So immediately I realized that what Jimmy was referring to was this creature called Sawande, a mysterious creature that has been described to me by my previous interviewees. So Sawande, literally meaning snow leopard monks, is a kind of mimayin in Tibetan language. It means non-humans. It's a kind of non-humans that resembles a snow leopard with a long tail. And according to my interlocutors, they typically walk on all fours, but can also stand upright like a human. And when they stand up, they wrap their tail around their head and appear from a distance, just like a monk wearing a red fox head. So one feature of the Sawande that has been frequently mentioned to me is their ability to identify individuals by smelling their footprints. So legend has it that Sawande can determine a person's name from the skin left on their footprints. Once a Sawande knows a person's name, then it then stands upright and waves its tail in a manner that exactly looks like a monk summoning the individual to wait for him. So should the person wait for the Sawande to approach, it will attack and eat them. I was told that in the past, many people on pilgrimage to Lhasa encounter Sawande, and with some falling prey to their predation, whereas others narrowly escape. So on that day, to my disappointment, Jimmy and I didn't encounter either brown bears nor snow leopard monks, despite my mentioning the name Sawande and Sa many times. When we returned to our tent on the autumn grassland, I asked Jimmy's father about the man-eating snow leopard. So he informed me that Sawande is not an animal, but a demo, which means a demo or an evil spirit in Tibetan language. So, and Jimmy's father told me, if not for Sawande's interference, there might have been an influential monastery in our valley. Sori told, Jimmy's father's name is Sori. So Sori told me with a hint of pity. And he went on to explain that years ago, Sawande disturbed a monk who came to Salon for meditation, forcing him to leave. and Sori was unsure of the exact time of this event since he had heard it from his late father. He also told me that some people believe that mentioning Sa one day can attract its presence, just as what Jimmy told me, and they even avoid saying the word Sa in order to prevent snow leopards from coming to attack their livestock. It is also a common belief that offending a regional or local deity, the Yuha or Sidak, may result in them sending their watchdogs, such as snow leopards or other large carnivores, to seek revenge by killing offenders' livestock. So animals in Tibetan cosmology is very complex. In the Tibetan language, wild animals, are typically divided into two categories. The first is called Zenzan, which refers to those carnivorous beasts with sharp claws and teeth, and is roughly equivalent to carnivores or those carnivorous mammals in scientific taxonomy. The second category is Ridak, which refers to those herbivores. They graze and they drink water. So my research is mainly focused on the interaction between those Tibetan herders and Zenzan, those large carnivores. The four accounts of stories about snow leopards and Tibetan herders mentioned above reflect or highlight the diverse Tibetan perspectives on these non-human animals and their intricate relationship with the Tibetan people. Snow leopards can be viewed as an enlightened Buddhist yogi or their monks, but they are also associated with non-human entities that can seek revenge against humans. As large carnivores that prey on wild ungulate and livestock to survive, snow leopards are deemed cruel, and pitiful, even pitiful by some Tibetan herders. But in some instances, snow leopard can also display a certain level of tolerance and even compassion towards humans. So these and other narratives weave together into a multi-layered cultural web of significance upon which the interaction between Tibetan nomads and the snow leopards unfold. And this is the focus of my scholarship in the past 7 years. So conceptually, I conceive human-wildlife coexistence as a multi-species social process that involves human and non-human agency embedded in what I call a natural, social, and cultural natures in specific time and space. And these natures form the context that simultaneously enables and constrains our interactions with wildlife and between the interaction and the interaction between different humans. So let's take a closer look. First is the natural part of these natures, which is about the biophysical elements, relations, and processes, including the biotic and the biotic components of environments and their interaction at different organizational levels. So whether humans are included in these natural natures depends on the observer's standpoint, and often they are not. The natural natures of human snow leopard coexistence in Tibet may include the snow leopards and their sympatric species, the grassland, rock mountains, glaciers, water, light, temperature, and so on. So most conservation biologists are predisposed by their professional training, their norms and conventions to attend to these natural natures. As a result, many studies about snow leopards focused on species population, abundance, and distribution. And many studies have suggested that climate change, habitat degradation, insufficient wild prey, human population increase, or land use change as potential factors that drive large carnivores into close vicinity to people or vice versa. Typically, these studies then offer technical solutions such as building fence, modifying the land use pattern, or regulating the prey abundance, aversive conditioning, translocation, removal, or to mitigate conflict through education, compensation, alternative livelihood, and so on. And evidence of the cause and effect is always often the focus of debate. The second part of these measures concerns the social political structure and the challenge of realizing harmonious coexistence between Tibetan herders and snow leopards. To a large extent, it is about who gets to decide what desirable coexistence is and how are we going to achieve it. So in other words, how should Tibetan herders live with snow leopard, and how are such decisions made, carried out, evaluated, and adjusted? These formal and informal decisions, including laws, regulations, policies, social norms, and behavior codes, determine how power, whereas respect, knowledge, affection, and other values, those things or events that people consider valuable, are produced and shared among members in the society. A central question is how political and economic structures shape the allocation of authority and control, and the distribution of the cost and benefit of existing with wildlife, a topic that many political ecology studies have examined. The last part, or the third part of the methods, is about cultural belief, and it is about these recurring patterns of perspective and practice that have significant influences on how we think, how we speak, and how we act. So it is this part of the measures, the cultural logic, that forms the underlying assumptions behind our social structure and social function, social process. So I'm very much concerned with the cultural logic underlying or about those foundational components, such as ontology, what is, epistemology, how do we know, and axiology, what is valuable, or what is good, what is bad. And these ontological, epistemological, and axiological symbols, formulas, and doctrines influence how we think about the challenges of living with those large carnivores, and how we are going to use all kinds of strategies to achieve the desired coexistence. A significant challenge of coexistence is always that different cultural beliefs may offer contradictory views about the similarities and differences between humans and non-human animals and the nature of their relationship. For example, here's an interesting observation. In my research, I pay attention to how scientists from natural and social science think about coexistence. I'm curious about how ecologists think about coexistence of different non-human species compared to how social scientists think about the coexistence of different ethnic groups or cultures. And one observation is that in the case of interspecific coexistence, or the coexistence between different non-human species, from the perspective of ecologists, similarities are often seen as the source of conflict, and stable coexistence requires some level of differences through mutual avoidance in time and space. And these similarities and differences are believed to exist mainly in the internalized, objectified body or environment. So we need to have niche differentiation and resources partitioning in order to achieve the stable coexistence between different species. On the other hand, when it comes to interhuman or intercultural coexistence, from the perspective of social scientists or social advocates, differences are often seen as the source of conflict. So differences are seen as the problem, and peaceful coexistence requires some level of similarities based on mutual understanding. And these differences or similarities in terms of intercultural coexistence are believed to be found in the internalized, subjectified mind. So the comparison between how coexistence between different species or within the same species are contemplated is revealing. It gives us insight into the dominant intellectual assumptions about the relations between human and non-human, between body and mind, between object and subject, and between similarities and differences. So a focus of my dissertation, of my research, is on how culture shape our understanding as to the means, ends, and context of coexistence. So in the following slides, I'm going to give you two examples. But first, let's look at the popular discourse currently dominate the conservationist way of thinking. So according to the popular discourse in the field of human-wildlife conflict or human-wildlife coexistence, people and wildlife living in shared landscape all usually compete for limited space and resources. And this competition has intensified, resulting from an increase in negative interaction, has intensified because of modernization or human population growth or other factors. And this results in an increase in negative interactions between people and wildlife. And this conflict are believed to lead to material or immaterial loss and risk to local people who may retaliate by killing the wildlife involved and thereby threatening the long-term survival of the species. So from this perspective, to promote desirable coexistence, it is necessary to prevent and mitigate negative interactions and to create conditions for positive interaction. Ideally, species conservation would involve spatially and temporarily separating people and wildlife by resettling people out of the cold zones of the protected areas or regulating humans' behaviors in certain places at certain times. But this is not always practical. And therefore, an alternative compromise approach is the coexistence model that primarily focused on changing people's attitude and behavior in order to increase their tolerance towards wildlife. My research aims to examine and challenge this popular problem definition, and it does so by studying how Tibetan herders and snow leopards interact with each other and how Tibetan Buddhist monk and Han Chinese conservationists think about the herder-leopard interactions. So let me give you two examples. The first example concerned with the culture, the cultural influence on the ends of coexistence. Although my monitoring and diet analysis revealed that livestock contribute significantly to the diet of snow leopards in my field site, local Tibetan herders in general tend to show a very high tolerance towards the so-called conflict. For example, here's a quote from one of my interviewees who has experienced substantial livestock loss to snow leopard. For a long time, this valley has been a shared home for both people and wildlife. It is not strange that you occasionally kill my livestock for food. It is also not unreasonable if I sometimes get so angry and kill you in return for my livelihood. But now there's a policy to protect you. You can harm my livestock, but I cannot hurt you. This has made us complete enemies. People all over the world want to protect you, but please don't forget that without my yacht and ship, you and your family can't have survived till today. So from my interviewee's perspective, when herders can kill snow leopards, they are not enemies. But when they cannot kill snow leopards, they become complete enemies. This seemingly illogical reasoning is not nonsense if we see it from the perspective of Tibetan Buddhism. On another occasion, my interviewee told me, sometimes I get so angry at them and hope to get rid of them, but sometimes I think snow leopards and I are the same. They have pups and I have kids. I keep livestock for myself and my family, and snow leopards kill my livestock for themselves and their children. Even though we don't speak the same language, we think in the same way. Thinking in this way, I don't dislike snow leopard that much. In fact, the most pathetic is not me, nor the snow leopard. It is my sheep. I eat them, and snow leopards eat them, poor sheep. So, whereas conservationists try to establish the importance or the significance of snow leopards, Tibetan Buddhist monks emphasize that every sentient being is born equal. Here is the quote from one of my monk interlocutors. Between snow leopards and sheep and herders, which side should we choose to help? When snow leopards kill sheep, we must be on the sheep's side. And when people kill snow leopards, we must be on the snow leopard's side. This choice is not because snow leopards are nationally protected animals, nor because sheep are livestock the herders depend on for survival. I make this choice because I believe that every sentient being is equal. So from the Buddhist perspective, all sentient beings are equal in the sense that every individual being wants to pursue happiness and avoid suffering. Equal also in the sense that every sentient being is no less or more worthy than anyone else. At the same time, all sentient beings are interconnected through reincarnation in the endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. So in our infinite past life, every sentient being has been our mother at some point. And as our mother, they took very good care of us. So we must recognize their kindness, and we must repay their kindness through compassion and love. Besides, there's no certainty in reincarnation. So although in this life, I am a human being, but I might be reborn as a snow leopard or a sheep in the next life. Hence, what matters to a snow leopard or a sheep also matters to me. And thus, reincarnation weaves an extensive network of social relationship among humans and non-humans. So, in some sense, conservation scientists see snow leopards taking people's livestock as a symptom of ecosystem dysfunction, which is the problem that needs to be addressed. By contrast, Buddhist monks think of the intimate relationship between herders and snow leopards through the loss of livestock as part of their interdependence. Whereas conservation scientists dichotomize conflict and coexistence and consider conflict unnatural and unwanted, Buddhist monks believe that certain magnitude of conflict is natural and integral to coexistence in this imperfect world, which is called samsara. So this is the first example. In the second example, which is about culture and the means to coexistence, I'm going to share with you the perspective from a Tibetan conservationist who has worked for a conservation NGO in Sanjiangyuan for more than a decade. And it is in December 2021, a conservation organization organized an online sharing section on human-bear conflict. The aim of the webinar was to encourage experience sharing among various conservation organizations and explore effective ways to foster coexistence between humans and brown bears. So this participant, I call him Jamba. So during this event, Jamba mentioned that his organization has tried several methods in the Three River Source region in order to mitigate and prevent human-bear conflict. But he said that this method was somehow effective at the very beginning, but they don't work very well over time because brown bears are very smart and they are capable of learning. So if people try to fight against brown bears, they may not be able to win. And he said that if we want to resolve these problems between human and brown bears, we need more than science. And he spent nearly 40 minutes explaining his viewpoints on why he thinks scientists are not doing enough. Here is a quote from Jamba. So I have been reflecting on human-bear conflict in recent years, and I have a strong feeling that there really exists two worlds. One world is the human world, and the other world is the world of those non-humans. He said, animals and other life forms in the human world all have two identities. In addition to their identity in the human world, animals have another identity in the other world. Therefore, if these two worlds don't have a very good relationship with each other, and if human worlds fight against the other world, we may not know where the other world is or how to deal with it. the other world can easily cause various impacts on our human world. Now, not only human-barrier conflict, but also various kinds of human natural disasters, such as floods and earthquake, are caused by the other world. In our religious culture, in the stories and legends of Tibetan culture, there are things that is beyond the human sensory faculty, perception. So he paused for a while and then he goes on to say, so my idea is that these two worlds are in conflict. There is a belief among us Tibetans that there are mountain deities, water deities, land lords, all kinds of sayings. These things actually exist in the other world. And if you do something to offend them, they will definitely retaliate against you. For example, if someone pollutes a spring and then gets sick, going to the hospital or getting injection, but getting vaccination will not cure the disease. The only way to treat it is to clean up the water source through some rituals. And once that's done, the illness will naturally heal. So we have this kind of belief. I feel that with regards to the human-barrier conflict, many people, including experts, teachers, and ordinary people alike, are saying that protecting the bear has led to an increase in the bear population. Some people also say that protecting them has made them bolder, so they are no longer afraid of humans. These statements are certainly factors that contribute to human-bear conflict, but I feel that there's something deeper. I believe that as humans, we have offended important parts of another world, the other world. To investigate this, it may only be possible for scientists and experts who have understanding of the religious aspect to collaborate in research. Only in this way can we create something meaningful and do something meaningful. So most of the Tibetan herders, including Buddhist monk, conservationists, and government officials that I interviewed, agreed that human-wildlife conflict in the Three Rivers Source region is an important, a challenging, a pressing issue that requires a solution. There is a consensus that identifying the root causes of those problems is important in order to find a remedy. However, these root causes are viewed differently among different groups. Han Chinese conservationists and government officials tend to focus on factors within this world, while Tibetan herders and Buddhist monks tend to look beyond this world to the other world. So in the cosmology of Tibetan traditional folk culture, apart from human and non-human animals living on the Tibetan plateau, there are also various non-humans that ordinary people generally cannot perceive. And these different forms of life inhabit in different but interconnected worlds that occupy the same space. So according to this perspective, what conservationists refer to as conflict between human and wildlife are actually conflict between humans and mountain deities. Therefore, in Tibetan language, people rarely use the term conflict between human and wildlife, and instead, religious texts and everyday language frequently mention conflict between humans and deities, demos, and non-human beings. And there are various rituals that are practiced in order to restore the harmony between humans and non-humans. So from this perspective, coexisting with large carnivores is essentially coexisting with mountain deities, because those large carnivores are usually considered the watchdogs of mountain deities. And coexisting between the mountain deities and the humans, between mountain deities and humans, are actually coexistence between the outer world and the inner world. So Tibetan culture talk about Qinang Sangsheng, the outer world, the inner world, and the secret world. And to achieve coexistence between these different worlds, thus required more than nature science research, physical prevention, or monetary compensation, but also necessitate a transformation in ways of knowing and ways of living. This concept of coexistence, as thus understood, extends beyond present time and immediate space. So to summarize, it's very important. I have been arguing, I have been making this argument that culture plays a very important role in how we think about the means, ends, and the context of coexistence. For example, is there a problem? What is the problem? What caused the problem? And if there really exists a problem, does the problem need to be addressed? And what are the appropriate solutions to the problem? All these questions have implications in how we think about the strategy towards coexistence. And people with living in very different culture may have very different understanding regarding these questions. And in my research, I have been highlighting the interconnection or the complex relationship between three kinds of coexistence: interspecific coexistence between people and wildlife, intergroup coexistence between people with very different identities, demands, and expectations, as well as intercultural coexistence between different ontological, cosmological, epistemological, and axiological myths. And this is very important when we think about the coexistence strategy. Of course, culture is changing very fast. Culture is not something stated, something remain the same all the time. And even within the same group, people might have very different understandings. And my field site, Nambo, is very unique, it's very special. And the group of monks and herders that I study are equally unique and special. So while I contrast the ontological, epistemological, cosmological, and axiological perspectives of Tibetan Buddhist monks and conservation scientists regarding the relationship between Tibetan herders and snow leopard, I do not assume that there's a single homogeneous Tibetan Buddhist or conservation scientist perspective. Furthermore, I'm not blind to the rapid changes that is going on in the social and cultural fabric of Tibetan plateau. Many of the so-called traditional ideas and practice that I describe in my dissertation and future books are rapidly disappearing, being deconstructed, negotiated, and reinvented in this society in great transition. So then if culture keeps changing so fast, then what is the point of studying the Tibetan understanding of human-wildlife coexistence? At the 15th conference of the parties to the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity, over 200 countries endorsed a vision of a future of harmonious coexistence, and countries commit to living in harmony with nature by 2050. Despite scientific evidence, technological innovation, market efficiency, and policy adjustment being crucial, I agree with many other scholars. I believe that achieving harmonious coexistence also requires a great transition in the values and organizing principles of our society, including transformative change in our ways of knowing and living. And the uniqueness of Tibetan culture offers a mirror that can help us reflect on the conventional ideas and practice of coexistence, and it offers an alternative future for human-wildlife coexistence. So in my research, I'm making the argument that Tibetan cultural resources can contribute to a new conservation paradigm that is urgently needed in order to achieve the goal of living in harmony with nature by 2050. And in order to facilitate such transition, I argue that it is very important to have individual and societal transformation. So we need a new consciousness. We need a new consciousness about ourselves, our relationship with nature, and what kind of desirable coexistence is, and what are the ways to achieve this kind of coexistence, and how are we going to establish a social and decision-making processes to help us reconcile those differences in ontology, epistemology, and axiology, so as to help us have a better chance to achieve coexistence. Of course, we need to improve the decision processes to address those actual and perceived conflicts, so as to better prevent conflict before it happens, to respond to conflict when it happens, and also to mitigate conflict after it happens. This requires the upgradation of the entire decision-making processes. Finally, beyond those upgradation in the decision-making processes, I believe coexistence requires transformative learning. We need to think about how can we educate ourselves about attentiveness, thoughtfulness, and actions needed, both individually and collectively, so as to live and thrive harmoniously with wildlife and nature. And this requires a lot of self-reflection, examine the dominant myth underlying our conservation ideas and practice. And that is why I have been having this conversation with Tibetan experts such as Khenpo Jasi Sampo, who is my great friend and also very important collaborators. And we have been doing a lot of dialogue and co-authored many articles and books in order to share with the general public and the conservation communities about another kind of alternative or an alternative version of coexistence and way of doing conservation and thinking about conservation. Finally, we need conservation edge workership. We need more people who are able to transcend those biophysical, socio-political, cultural, and disciplinary boundaries to bridge different worlds between humans and non-humans, between different human groups and between different cultures for the common welfare or the well-being of all sentient life on Earth. And this is the program that have been running since 2017 in order to foster such conservation edge workership among early career conservationists in China. Thank you very much. I hope you find my presentation useful. This is what I'm going to say today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Gao. This was really an insightful talk. I personally really enjoyed it. So, yeah, to basically move on to the next part of today's program, we have Saloni here, Dr. Saloni Bhatia, who would, for some time, maybe around 5 to 10 minutes max, have a discussion with you. And then again, I bring this up that if you have any questions, please write it in the chat box and we will discuss them after this next section. So yeah, floor is yours, Saloni and Gao.
Thanks, Arash. Gao, that was really fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing some of your insights from your research. And I couldn't help but draw parallels between your journey and mine, because mine is a very similar one to yours, where I looked at the relationship between culture and conservation in the Indian context. And some of the stories you narrated, because the place I was working in, half of it was, people practiced Tibetan Buddhism. So there are a lot of parallels to be drawn, even in terms of the kind of stories you narrated, this whole interdependence and relationships between the human and the non-human worlds. It's really quite fascinating and quite rich. I really, through my journey, there were a couple of questions that I asked myself, and perhaps this is a good time to pose them back to you, which was, so you have, I'm trying to see which one to start with. So the first thing was, the fact that culture is not homogeneous, and neither are communities. So even among Tibetan Buddhists, there will be a lot of variation in terms of the kind of cultural practices and beliefs. Maybe they will differ at the level of the individual, or differ at the level of the village, or at different scales, right? And it's really nice that you were able to bring in this whole aspect of heterogeneity, because often when we think of the relationship between the two, we tend to think of it as a monolith. We don't look at the spectrum and the nuances within that relationship. So for example, when I was studying the same issue back in India, I noticed that there was a very different worldview that the younger generation had compared to the older herders. in that landscape. And like you rightly mentioned, it's owing to various factors. There's a massive sociocultural transformation that is happening in these communities, and people are moving towards alternative ways of life, which also has implications for the landscape and how people relate to the landscape and to the various species that are found. The other thing that I also noticed, and you also mentioned this, was the fact that there are multiple species that people are trying to coexist with, right? It's not just the snow leopard, there is the brown bear, there is the wolf. And I found that the cultural associations that people had with different species also differed significantly. So there were certain kind of stereotypes associated, say, with the wolf compared to the snow leopard. The snow leopard has always been like this mythical creature of the mountains, lauded for its aesthetic qualities and some utilitarian qualities, but also the animosity that I felt people had towards the wolf was much greater. We're talking about even within the same culture, the associations can vary significantly, and so can the stories and narratives around various species. And this thing you mentioned about three kinds of coexistence. There is the interspecific and the intercultural, and the third one between various groups. Just one observation that I had, and perhaps you could elaborate on that, is when we talk about coexistence, sometimes we tend to think of it as an active choice, but sometimes it need not be an active choice that a community or an individual might make. It might just be the lack of choice that has resulted in certain conditions, a manufactured choice, which is it's like produced due to various circumstances, both social, political, and otherwise. So I was wondering what your thoughts are on this.
Okay. Thank you so much for your wonderful comments, and really very insightful, and also point out some of the most important questions that my research tried to address. So first, regarding the culture, homogeneous, whether homogeneous or heterogeneous. Of course, yeah, you are right. Like even within the same group, they might have very different understandings regarding snow leopards, the meaning of snow leopards, and their relationship with snow leopards. So Tibetan Buddhism has different sect and different schools, and different schools also have very different understanding about the fundamental ontology, epistemology, and axiology. Even though all are Buddhism, but they practice Buddhism in a little bit different ways. And there are differences in those fundamental assumptions. So yes, I see the differences. And the differences not just between different monks or different school of Buddhism, but also between Buddhist monks and Tibetan herders. So those Buddhist monks that I study, they tend to be the elite in their community. And so their perspective might be different compared to the perspective of those Tibetan herders who really live in close vicinity to those large carnivores. And Tibetan herders themselves might also have very different perceptions, perspectives, depending on their status or their place in the social structure. So very diverse. There are also differences among Tibetan monk scholars and Tibetan anthropologists. So how Tibetan anthropologists think about the relationship between snow leopards and herders, how they approach the topic from outside perspective or the inside perspective can be very different from the approach of the Tibetan Buddhist monks. So you are right. We are not supposed to generalize those differences or perspectives. They are different. And this is something that I tried to emphasize in my dissertation. And actually there's a chapter about knowing snow leopards, in which I write about how different groups of people, the Tibetan monks, Tibetan herders, and Tibetan anthropologists, conservation scientists, think about the snow leopards and how they know about snow leopard. On the other hand, conservationists are equally diverse. So we talk about conservation scientist perspectives on coexistence. But as you guys all know, that conservationists in different places and different conservationists may have very different ideas about coexistence. And there's not even a unique definition of coexistence in this case. So very diverse perspective. And the most important question that I ask myself is, given there are so many diverse perspectives, which kind of perspective currently have the power or holds the significant power in shaping the discourse? So which perspective has that kind of discursive power in shaping the way we think about the means and ends of coexistence? And that is what I try to point to and also try to contrast. So I tend to see these two mainstream ideas of coexistence. One is represented by those Buddhist monks that I study, and the other are the perspective of those conservation scientists who are currently playing an important role in shaping the policies and conservation activities in Sanjiangyuan and the Three River Source region. So I try to contrast these two because they are important players in the social process. And while not marginalized or not forgetting that there are diversities even within two groups, because in order to do the comparison, sometimes we need to jump out a little bit in order to see the differences. So this is one thing. And the other thing that I would like to emphasize is that similarities and differences are from different perspectives. Like in order to compare two entities, or when we compare two entities and relationship, we can always find similarities. We can always find differences. So it depends on the standpoint of us as an observer, as a researcher. So what is the point of doing this research if I want to emphasize similarities, or will I want to emphasize differences? For what purpose? And that is why we researchers should also have a very clear awareness about our own standpoint and how our tendency to emphasize similarities or differences shape the way we approach the research topic. So this is the first answer to your first question. Regarding the second question about the differences among different species. Okay, yeah, again, it's about differences. And of course, yeah, different animals, because of their different complex, what I call physical, physiological, and psychological complex. So different animals have different evolutionary trajectory, and even different individual animals have their different life experience. So there are differences in terms of how people perceive wolf, snow leopards, brown bears, these three large carnivores popular or most prevalent on the Tibetan plateau. There are also differences among each individual animals. So each brown bear is different because each brown bear has its own life trajectory, and it might develop certain interactions with peoples in different ways. And this is also something I emphasize in my research, in my dissertation. Actually, I also have one chapter about the ambivalent attitude towards these large carnivore species. And I emphasize the need to contextualize the attitude, because sometimes we conservationists tend to overgeneralize our observation, overgeneralize local attitudes towards large carnivores. For example, people might say, oh, Tibetan herders tend to have a positive attitude towards snow leopards, a negative attitude towards brown bear, and a neutral attitude towards wolf. Yeah, some people may make this kind of claim. And in my research, through my questionnaire surveys and interviews, I use quantitative and qualitative data to show that actually the situation is much more complex. It depends on what kind of attitude are we talking about. For example, are we talking about affection? Are we talking about behavior attitude? Or are we talking about people's evaluation of the cost and benefit of living those with those carnivores? So what kind of components of attitude are we talking about? The second is, in what kind of context are we asking people about their attitudes towards these large carnivores? And in different contexts, people's attitudes may vary. For example, in terms of wolf, Tibetan people's attitude towards wolf is very complex. In some case or in some context, people hate wolf because wolf kill their livestock, and wolf is the large carnivore that live in the most close vicinity or the closest vicinity to human settlement. So people and wolf have a lot of overlapping in terms of their activities, their life history. So people hate wolf because wolf cause trouble to their livelihood. But in some context, people like to see wolf, especially when they go out on business. And if you see a wolf cross the road, I forgot whether it's on the right side to the left side or the left side to the right side, then people feel it's auspicious. It's good. It's a good sign, a sign of success. And so they like to see wolf, and wolf becomes a good symbol. So the meaning of different species are different because of the unique characteristic of these different animals, and also because of the different context. And that is why we need to develop more contextual understanding about the people's interaction with those large carnivores. So this is my answer to your second question. Regarding the third question about whether coexistence is an active choice or a passive choice, I think it also varies across different contexts. And I agree that you are right. In many cases, it's a reality. It's a reality. We just have to live, share the landscape with those large carnivore species. I did an evaluation of the meaning of coexistence in the scientific literatures, and I found three ways of talking about coexistence. Some people tend to see coexistence as something ideal, an ideal status of human-wildlife interaction. So coexistence becomes the goal or a normative ideal situation, what it ought to be. And some people see coexistence as merely a status, a current status of living or sharing the landscape with wildlife in the same place, at the same time. So it becomes a matter of fact. It's a matter of fact. We need to share landscape with those large carnivores, with those wildlife. This is the second way of thinking about coexistence. And the third way of thinking about coexistence is to see coexistence as a model, a conservation approach. So, and this is in opposite to the mode of separation. Historically and contemporary, many conservationists might perceive that humans and large carnivores can only exist by separation, by separating them into different places and at different time in order to achieve the coexistence. So there are different ways of thinking about coexistence, and it also depends on at what scale are we talking about coexistence. If we look at this issue from a very high scale above the Earth, the global Earth, then look at this. We humans, animals, all share the Earth, the planet Earth. So we all coexist on this planet Earth. And on the other hand, this is the fact that coexistence, we have to share this planet Earth. Otherwise, we have no other place to go, at least according to our current knowledge. And on the other hand, if we zoom in and then to look at this issue at the closer scale, then we might see how in some place, actually humans and wildlife, each has their preferred habitat, preferred space, preferred time. So coexistence, the way we define it, we use it, also depends on the scale that we approach this topic. And whether it is active and a result of active choice or passive choice is also influenced by the kind of scale that we look at this issue. And so this is my thought.
Thank you very much. Well, I don't know if there is no burning thoughts and responses from you, Saloni. I mean,
may I just share one thing, if there's time?
Sure.
Yeah. So, I mean, Gao, I really appreciate the way you've articulated this, because I think, especially kind of really trying to unpack what coexistence means, I think is something that I've been kind of struggling with in a sense, because it's a complicated concept. comes from, it varies depending on who you ask. And also this thing you mentioned about ambivalent attitudes. I think as conservationists, when we dichotomize things and say, okay, these people have positive attitudes versus these people have negative attitudes, it's easier to work with because then there are quote unquote solutions to the problem one way or another.
Mhm.
When there is ambivalence and neutrality, it's a much harder dialogue to have, is the impression I get.
Mhm.
The other thing I quickly wanted to mention was, when I was, I was collecting data from Ladakh in India, I noticed that I went in with the lens of a conservationist or an aspiring conservationist, and therefore the snow leopard, it was kind of common sense to think of it as an ecological flagship species for the landscape, right? It is a flagship species, and that is a line I've used in so many proposals saying the snow leopard, apex predator, blah blah. But when I actually sat down to speak to people, I realized that for them, culturally speaking, the snow leopard wasn't really a flagship. I mean, it was
Mm.
one of the many species that they interacted with. And when I delved into it a bit more, I was told that, it's not a species we have a lot of overlaps with, both spatially or temporally. I mean, we interact much more with, say, the ibex. And so the ibex is part of so many songs, it's part of so many rituals and customs, and almost one could call it like a cultural flagship for the landscape. So I feel that this learning I had, that there is a difference between how we even define the word flagship, has implications for how we see the landscape and people's relationships with the different animals. So I'll leave you with this.
Thank you so much. Very interesting. And I see a lot of similarities between our research. In my field side, people also do not think snow leopard is flagship species, and they see snow lion. Snow lion more important, culturally more important than snow leopard. And I also collect data on how Tibetan people think about the landscape, or how they categorize different kinds of mountains. So we tend to see snow leopard as living in the snow mountains, but in Tibetan language, snow leopard's habitat is called Zari. It's rocky mountain. So it should be rock leopard, not snow leopard. And it's the snow lion that inhabit the kind of snow mountain in the true sense. So there are differences in how people conceptualize this landscape, the eternal world, and their relationship with it. And people always create all kinds of symbols or signs to help them make sense of the world. And a large part of my research is informed by semiotics. So I use draw from semiotics to help me make sense of this kind of complexities. And as a student in a combined program between anthropology and conservation, I often feel I'm kind of in the middle. Many anthropologists do not see me as an anthropologist. They feel like my approach is too scientific. And the way that I write and publish is too natural science for them. On the other hand, many conservationists do not see me as one of them, or do not see me as a natural scientist, even though I also do camera trapping and I also publish in conservation biology, biological conservation. They see me as an anthropologist. And they see my approach is to social science. So I'm always in the middle, and I try to bridge the gap between this different world to bring about new perspectives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, both. We have we are severely beyond our scheduled time, but it's such an interesting discussion that I couldn't really stop. So there are a few questions that in the next 3-4 minutes, if we can have a quick response from Hugo, that would be great. If not, Raki has kindly noted down these questions, and you can respond to them directly after this webinar. But I go with the first one, and this is, shorten it and go directly to the question. But Sibylle Noras is saying, do you hear stories of fears of human attack in your work today, or is it more something from the past? it comes with more text, but this is the specific part about the question.
Human fear
of snow leopard attacking humans, basically.
No, I have never heard of this case, this kind of incidents in my field site and across other part of Tibetan plateau. There are many snow leopard experts in this room, so maybe people can tell if they have run into such an incident. But so far as I know, I have never heard about this. And
maybe the question, if I understood it correctly, is more about like the internal kind of fear and less about the actual cases. So is there such a fear among the people?
Yes, yeah. There's such fear among people towards those Zhenzhan, those large carnivores. Yeah.
Okay.
And no, snow leopard only occurred in very specific valleys, at least in my field site. So all of these days, they are everywhere. It seems that snow leopard, you find snow leopard and capture snow leopard photos everywhere. But in the history of at this many decades ago, only very few people have witnessed snow leopard, like have seen snow leopard. So to the majority of Tibetan herders, they do not have this kind of actual encounter with snow leopard. And that is why there are also all kinds of imagination about this species, including the fear towards this species.
Another really interesting question. Thanks for your response. But there is also one question from Jessica Wang. Again, I shorten it, but the core of the question is basically, do you think modern conservation measures are posing obstacles for the natural way of human-wildlife coexistence? And to what extent should conservationists adopt modern conservation measures and theories into wildlife conservation?
And this is a very complex question. And I think if I explain, and it's going to take a lot of time. So maybe I answer this question later. But basically,
Sure.
I'd like to say is like in different stage, conservation approach, conservation ideas has also been evolving at different historical period. People do conservation in different ways, and they understand the relationship between human and nature in different ways, using different approach to do conservation. So the key point is we need to be more reflective, and we need to think about those different knowledge, different way of knowing, and think about how we are going to integrate them in our conservation practice, rather than simply treating the other way of knowing as superstition. Okay.
Thank you very much. There are a few other questions, but I know that these have been noted, and Gao is going to get back to you. I would like to end this fascinating discussion here, and thank you all for attending. Thank you to Saloni and Gao for great discussions, great insights about human-wildlife coexistence in the Tibetan plateau. I learned a lot, and thanks for joining in. Nothing further from my side. Follow the upcoming webinars, and hope to see you around. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Arash, Gao, and Saloni. And the remaining questions I'll just get across in a mail to you, Gao and Saloni. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Arash.
Yeah.
Thank you.
See you soon.
Thank you so
Bye.
much.